The doors of the grand ballroom swung open and every head turned at once. A woman stepped inside, tall, composed, draped in black silk that caught the chandelier light like a blade. Scarlet Hayes had arrived at the wedding of the man who once broke her. But the room did not fall silent because of her. It fell silent because of the man walking beside her. Not a boyfriend, not a partner. Her assistant, Adrian Cole, moving with the quiet certainty of someone who belonged there. Julian Cross froze. His smile cracked. What game was she playing? The 42nd floor of Hayes Capital was silent, except for the soft hum of the city through floor-to-ceiling glass. 3 weeks before the doors of the Vanderlyn Ballroom would open, on a crowd that gasped at her arrival, Scarlet Hayes sat behind a desk, the color of dark smoke, signing documents without looking up. She ran one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast, and she ran it the way she ran everything else, with precision and without apology. Adrian Cole stood across from her, tablet in hand, reading the morning agenda. His voice was low and even stripped of anything decorative. He had worked beside her for 6 years. In that time, he had learned 2 things she did not like: wasted words, and she did not like being surprised. Tokyo moved the call to 4, he said. The Hartwell board wants a revised memo by the end of the day, and your mail has been sorted. 1 item flagged. She kept her eyes on the page. Flagged by who? Me. Now she looked up. Adrian set a single ivory envelope on the desk. Thick paper. Gold edge. The kind of stationery used for weddings or funerals. Her eyes moved over at once, and something behind her face went still. Not shock, not hurt, just a small internal click, like a door locking from the inside. She slid 1 finger under the seal and read without moving. The invitation requested the honor of her presence at the wedding of Julian Cross and Vivienne Langford on the 14th of the following month at the Vanderlyn estate. At the bottom, in handwriting, she recognized 1 line had been added. Hope you can make it. Scar. Adrian did not watch her face. He had learned long ago not to watch her face in moments like this. He watched her hands. Her hands were steady. That was worse than if they had trembled. Shall I decline on your behalf? He asked. No. Shall I send a gift? No. She set the invitation down and turned her chair toward the window. The light caught the line of her jaw, and for the first time that morning, he allowed himself to look at her for longer than a second. Not because he wanted to, because he knew her, and he knew what this was. 2 years earlier, Julian Cross had been the man she almost became someone else for. He had taken what he needed and left on a private plane with a woman whose father owned a bank. Scarlett had said nothing, not to her board, not to the press, not to Adrian. She had returned to the office the following Monday and closed a $140 million deal by Friday. Adrian had always assumed she was done with it. Sitting across from her now, he understood she had not been done. She had only been quiet. He didn't send this as a courtesy, she said. Her reflection in the glass wore a thin, controlled smile. He sent it as a scoreboard. Then we ignore it. No, she turned back. We attend. His expression did not change. That was part of his job. But under the skin somewhere, he rarely let himself examine. The temperature shifted. Understood. I'll arrange transport and security. Adrian? Ma'am, you're coming with me. Of course, not like that. Her eyes held his, and the look in them was no longer businesslike. Not as my assistant, not 3 steps behind me, not with a folder under your arm. You walk in beside me. You stand where a partner stands. You speak when a man like that would speak. Can you do that? It was not phrased as a question, and he did not answer it as one right away. He had spent his entire adult life measuring the distance between what was appropriate and what was not. His career had been built on never miscalculating that distance by so much as an inch. What she was asking him to do was to erase the line entirely for one evening, in front of a room of people who would study every gesture he made. You understand what you're asking, he said. I do. And after the wedding, we go back to the way things were. He did not believe her. He did not think she believed herself. But Scarlett Hayes did not ask twice, and she did not ask for help from anyone, for any reason ever. That she was asking him now meant something. He did not yet know what, and he was not sure he wanted to. Then I'll be ready, he said. She nodded once the matter closed, and returned to the documents on her desk, as though the last 60 seconds had never happened. Adrian walked out of the office and closed the glass door behind him. For a moment he stood in the empty corridor, watching the envelope through the wall of glass, ivory gold-edged impossibly small, for the damage it had just done. A man had spent years teaching himself to want nothing from her, beyond a paycheck and a professional reference. That discipline had been the quiet achievement of his life. It had also, he suspected, been a lie. He adjusted his cuff. He straightened the line of his jacket. Then he went back to work. 3 weeks later, he would be standing beside her at the entrance of the Vanderlyn ballroom in a charcoal suit she had chosen herself, with every head in the room turning toward them. But in that corridor on the 42nd floor, on the morning the invitation arrived, he already understood that the line he had spent 6 years protecting had just been quietly, deliberately, and permanently crossed. The Vanderlyn estate sat at the end of a long drive lined with white lanterns, and by the time the car rolled to a stop, the ballroom had already begun to fill. Adrian stepped out first, the way she had asked, and offered her his hand. Scarlett took it without looking at him. Her glove was black. Her mouth was the color of wine. When she rose from the car, the doorman forgot to speak. They moved up the stone steps at a measured pace, neither slow enough to look hesitant, nor fast enough to look eager. Adrian had spent 3 weeks preparing for this walk. Not the suit, not the logistics, but the walk itself. And still, when the doors opened and the chandelier light poured over them, something in his chest tightened. It was not nerves. It was the sudden, unwelcome clarity that he wanted to be worthy of the position she had placed him in. Heads turned before they were fully inside. A waiter with a tray of champagne paused mid-step. An older woman near the seating chart leaned toward the man beside her and said something behind a program. The whispers were not loud, but Scarlett had spent a lifetime reading rooms, and she heard every one of them. She did not slow. She did not scan for Julian. She allowed the room to come to her. Adrian kept his hand at the small of her back, not possessive, not theatrical, just present. He had told himself on the drive over that he would treat the evening like any other assignment. He had rehearsed the boundary in his head the entire way there. In the first 20 seconds inside the room, he understood the rehearsal had been pointless. Standing beside her in public was not the same thing as standing beside her in an office. The air was different. The rules were different, and he was no longer entirely sure which man he was supposed to be. Near the fountain at the center of the hall, Julian Cross was greeting a cluster of guests. He was laughing at something when he saw them. The laugh did not end, so much as evaporate. His eyes moved from Scarlett to the man beside her, and lingered there longer than was polite. Long enough that the woman at his elbow noticed. Vivian Langford, in a dress the color of fresh cream, turned her head, followed his gaze, and did not bother to hide her displeasure. Scarlett accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and did not look in Julian's direction. She did not need to. The entire room had already rearranged itself around the angle of her shoulders, and she let the rearrangement happen without lifting a finger to help it. Adrian watched her do it, and understood for the first time the difference between power as a resume and power as a physical fact. "He's coming over," Adrian said quietly. "I know." Julian crossed the ballroom with Vivian on his arm. He wore the smile of a man who had rehearsed this moment in a mirror. Up close, the smile was a little too wide, the eyes, a little too careful. He extended a hand to Scarlett, as though they were old colleagues at an industry dinner. "You came?" Julian said. I wasn't sure you would. You sent an invitation, Scarlett said. I answered it. It's good to see you, Scar. Is it? The word landed without weight, which made it heavier. Julian's smile flickered. Vivienne stepped forward half a pace and placed a possessive palm on his forearm. Her eyes moved to Adrian and stayed there with the particular attention women of a certain upbringing reserved for men they could not immediately categorize. And this is, Vivienne asked, tilting her head. Adrian Cole. Scarlett said, Cole. Vivienne rolled the name around her mouth like she was tasting a wine she had already decided not to buy. I don't think we've met at any of the usual places. Are you in finance, real estate? I work with Scarlett, Adrian said. Oh, a small smile polished and cold. So you're her assistant. She said the word the way a person says a diagnosis. Somewhere behind her, two women on the edge of their conversation pretended not to be listening and listened harder. Julian's posture shifted a fraction. He had not expected this line of attack, and he was enjoying it. Adrian did not look at Scarlett. He did not need her to rescue him, and he did not want her to try. He looked at Vivienne, and he let a full beat pass before he answered, not out of hesitation, but because he had learned years ago that people who swung first were always surprised when the response did not arrive on their schedule. I am, he said. I've been with her for 6 years. In that time, I've sat in on every deal that built the firm you just married into the orbit of. If you'd like the specifics, I'm happy to walk you through them. But I suspect this isn't the evening for it. The smile on Vivienne's face did not move. Her eyes did. A small adjustment behind them, the kind that happens when a person realizes the ground under their heels is not where they thought it was. Julian's hand tightened on her arm without his meaning it to. I didn't mean to offend, Vivienne said, recovering. You didn't, Adrian said. You were informing a room. I'm informing it back. Scarlett lifted her glass to her mouth to hide what was almost for half a second a smile. The conversation did not last much longer. Julian offered a polite congratulation on some recent acquisition he had read about in the journal. Scarlett returned it with the same polite indifference, and within a minute, the four of them had separated back into the room. But the temperature had changed. The women near the fountain were no longer whispering about Scarlett. They were whispering about the man beside her, about the assistant who had answered back, about the bride who had opened a door and walked into it. They were seated at a table 4 rows from the front, close enough to be visible far enough to suggest Julian had thought about the placement for longer than he should have. Scarlett took her seat and let Adrian pull her chair in. A man 2 seats down leaned toward his wife and said just loudly enough to be overheard, "That's her, the one Cross was with before." The wife, to her credit, did not turn her head. She did, however, glance at Adrian, and then she glanced at him again. Between the first course and the toast, something unrehearsed began to happen. Adrian leaned in to hand Scarlett a napkin she had not asked for, and she took it without looking up. And the motion between them was so ordinary, so practiced, that the woman across the table blinked. He murmured something dry about the centerpiece. Scarlett answered without thinking. For the first time since the invitation had arrived on her desk, the tension she had carried into the room quietly loosened, and she did not notice it, which was the point. Adrian noticed. He noticed because he had spent 6 years cataloging the exact weight she gave to every posture, and he knew what it meant when that weight eased. He also knew he was no longer acting. Somewhere between the entrance and the second course, the performance had stopped being a performance, and he did not know when to tell her, or whether to tell her at all. At the head table, Julian was not eating. He was watching. His bride was speaking to a cousin on her right, and he was nodding at the appropriate intervals. But his eyes kept traveling, pulled across the room, on a tether he had not expected to feel. Scarlett had arrived looking flawless. He had been prepared for flawless. What he had not been prepared for was the ease. She was laughing low, soft, and at something the man beside her had said. Julian had spent 2 years telling himself she had been a cold woman who could not love. The woman at that table was not cold, which meant the problem had not been her, He drank more than he should have before the toasts. By the time the best man stood up to speak, Julian was already composing in the back of his head the sentence that would correct the evening's drift. He did not plan to use it. He told himself across 3 glasses of wine that he would not use it. Then the best man finished, and the microphone passed to him, and he rose from his chair with it still in his hand. He thanked the usual people. He told the usual stories. He turned toward his bride with the usual tenderness. And then, somewhere in the middle of a sentence about second chances, he said her name. "Most of you know I wasn't always the easiest man to love," Julian said, and a few people laughed politely. There's a woman in this room tonight who could tell you that better than anyone. Scar, if you're still listening, I hope you found what you were looking for. I hope he makes you happier than I ever managed to. The laughter thinned. A few heads turned slowly in the way heads turn when a room has collectively decided to pretend it has not heard what it just heard. The music in the background continued at the wrong volume. Vivienne's smile was fixed in place like a photograph, and next to her, a bridesmaid reached over and quietly took the water glass from her hand before she could set it down too hard. Scarlett did not move. Her glass did not rise. Her face did not change. She had trained herself over the course of a professional lifetime to meet exactly this kind of moment, with exactly this kind of stillness, and the stillness was doing its job. But Adrian, seated close enough to feel the heat coming off her shoulder, understood that underneath the stillness, something had just been struck hard, and that no one in the room would ever see it except him. He set his napkin down. He did not look at Scarlett for permission. He rose. The motion was small, a single man standing up at a single table on the 4th row. But the room had already been listening for something, and a standing man was something, and every eye in the ballroom turned. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Adrian said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "I'll keep it brief." Julian, still holding the microphone, made the mistake of smiling. "Mr. Cross." Adrian said, "I understand that tonight is a night for speeches, and I understand that long-form nostalgia is sometimes part of that. But the woman you just addressed is a guest in your home. She accepted an invitation you sent. She did you the courtesy of showing up, and in return, you used a microphone to revisit a relationship she chose to leave behind. I'd like to ask you with all the goodwill I can manage not to do that again this evening." He turned very slightly toward the rest of the room. His voice stayed even. "I apologize to the bride for the interruption. I wish you both a long marriage." He sat down. There was a beat of absolute silence. Then somebody at a side table set their glass down a little too hard, and the sound carried, and the spell broke. Conversations resumed at half their previous volume. The string quartet, which had been waiting for a cue, started playing again. Julian was still holding the microphone. He lowered it slowly and handed it to the best man, who did not know what to do with it. Scarlett did not look at Adrian. She reached for her glass. Her fingers were steady, but only by decision, and he felt the decision travel through the small space between them like a current. Under the table, without turning her head, she let her hand rest on the edge of his for 1 second. Not a grip. Not a signal for the room. A private, unadorned acknowledgement. In 6 years of working together, she had never reached for him without a reason the office would have understood. Tonight, she reached anyway. Across the ballroom, Julian had returned to his seat. He was no longer watching Scarlett. He was staring at the tablecloth in front of him, and his bride was saying his name in a low, tight voice that nobody else could hear. He did not answer her. He had understood somewhere during Adrian's sentence about goodwill that he had miscalculated not the evening, not the speech, but the 2 years he had spent telling himself a story about a woman he had never actually known. Scarlett drew her hand back before the current between them could become anything the room could see. She lifted her glass to her mouth and drank. Her eyes were fixed somewhere near the far wall on nothing in particular, and for the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in a decade, the control she wore like armor was not entirely in her possession. It had been loosened, and the man who had loosened it was sitting 2 inches to her left, saying nothing. And she could not, for the length of several long seconds, decide whether to be grateful or afraid. They left before the cake was cut. Scarlett rose without ceremony, laid her napkin on the table, and walked the length of the ballroom at the same measured pace she had used to enter. Adrian walked beside her. Nobody stopped them. Nobody had the nerve to. The car was waiting where they had left it. She slid into the back seat and did not speak. He got in on the other side and did not press her. The driver took them down the long, lantern-lined drive and onto the dark stretch of highway that ran back toward the city, and for several miles neither of them said a word. The coastline fell away behind them. The skyline began as a glow at the horizon and slowly became a grid of lights. Somewhere along the way, she finally turned her head toward the window and released a breath she had been holding, he suspected, since Julian had said her name. "You shouldn't have stood up," she said. "I know. That wasn't the arrangement. I know." She did not look at him. Her reflection in the window was composed, but there was a line of tension at the corner of her mouth that had not been there when they left the office that afternoon. "Why did you then?" Adrian thought about the question. He had been thinking about it in one form or another since the moment he sat back down. "Because he was going to keep talking," he said, "and you were going to let him. And I have spent 6 years watching you let people take things from you, because stopping them would have cost you the shape you show the world. Tonight, I decided it was not worth what he was about to do to you." She did not answer. The car kept moving. The silence between them was not the silence of a professional morning. It was the silence of 2 people who had somewhere in the last 4 hours stopped being able to pretend. "You overstepped," she said eventually. "Yes. You know what that means for Monday." "I do." "And you did it anyway." "I did." She turned her head and looked directly at him then. The streetlights moved across her face in slow, regular intervals. She had spent the evening holding a shape so carefully that he could see now in the privacy of the back seat the exhaustion of holding it. The composure was still there. It was just no longer airtight. "I have not needed anyone in a very long time," Scarlett said. "I trained myself out of it. I was good at it. I thought I had made it permanent." Her eyes did not move from his. "I walked into that ballroom tonight, telling myself I went to close a door. I think I lied to myself about that. I think I went to prove I could stand in front of him and feel nothing. And I felt something. And the thing I felt was not about him." Adrian did not move. He had learned over the years when to speak and when to be still. This was one of the second kind. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. "I am not equipped for it. I built a life in which this specific situation would never happen. And it happened anyway in a ballroom in front of 200 people because I asked you to stand next to me, and you did it too well." Scarlett. He had never used her first name before. Tonight he did. She heard it. She heard it the way a person hears their own name, spoken by someone who has been careful with it for a long time. Something behind her face gave very slightly, and she looked away from him and back to the window. "I don't want an apology," she said. "I wasn't going to offer one." "Good." The car turned onto her street. Her building rose above them, all glass and cold stone, and the driver eased to the curb. Neither of them moved to open a door. "I have a choice to make," Scarlett said to the window. "I can walk upstairs tonight and be at my desk on Monday, and we can both pretend none of this happened. You will go back to handing me folders. I will go back to signing them. The arrangement we agreed on will hold. That is one version of the rest of this. It is. There's another version." She still did not turn her head. "In the other version, I stop." "Stop what?" "Stop organizing my life around the shape of a man who is not in it anymore. Stop punishing rooms for things that happened 2 years ago. Stop treating the person sitting next to me in a car at midnight like a staffing question." Her voice was very level. "Stop pretending I do not know the difference between the man I married in my head at 28 and the one who has been standing 3 feet behind me since I was 33. Adrian did not breathe for a moment. He had imagined in a corner of himself. He rarely visited variations of this conversation. None of them had sounded like her. Hers was drier, cleaner, and more honest than anything he had rehearsed. "I'm not asking you for anything tonight," she said. "I'm telling you that on Monday I will not be able to hand you a folder and call it what we used to call it. If that is a problem, I need to know. If it is not a problem, I need to know that too. I am too old to be uncertain about the people who stand next to me." Adrian looked at her profile in the streetlight. He thought about the 6 years, and about the distance he had spent them maintaining, and about how much of that distance had been protection for him rather than for her. He thought about the moment in the ballroom when he had stood up without consulting her. He thought about her hand under the table resting on the edge of his. "It is not a problem," he said. "You understand what you're agreeing to. I understood it 3 weeks ago in your office. I just didn't want to say it out loud." She turned toward him then, fully, without the composure she had worn all evening. "Say it out loud," she said. "I stopped being your assistant somewhere in the middle of year 3, Adrian said. "I kept the title because you needed someone you could trust, and because the title made the trust manageable. I am telling you tonight that the title has been a convenience for both of us, and I am willing to set it down if you are. And if I'm not ready for the thing on the other side of it, then I wait. I don't like being waited for. I know." A small, dry, almost smile passed across his mouth. "I'm not doing it for you." Something in her shoulders, the last of the rigidity she had carried into the car, finally eased. She looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back, and the silence between them was not heavy anymore. It was simply a silence that two people were allowed to have. "Walk me up," she said. He opened his door and came around the car and offered his hand, and this time when she took it, there was no audience to perform for. The doorman nodded them through. The lobby was empty. The elevator hummed up 40 stories without a word passing between them, and the word was not needed. At her door, she turned the key and held it in the lock for a second, before she looked back at him. "I will see you at 9, she said. 9. With coffee. With coffee. Adrian. Ma'am, don't call me that tomorrow. Understood." She stepped inside and closed the door, and he stood in the hallway for a moment, with his hands in the pockets of the charcoal suit she had chosen for him, listening to the soft sound of the lock turning. Then he walked back to the elevator and rode it down, and the city outside was quieter than he remembered a Saturday night in it ever being. Back at the Vanderlyn estate, the ballroom was being taken down by a crew in white shirts. Julian Cross was sitting on a bench outside the east veranda, with his jacket over his arm and his tie loose at the collar. His bride had gone upstairs without him after a brief, quiet conversation in a side hallway, the kind of conversation two people have when they both already know how it ends. He had not followed her, and he was not sure sitting in the cold when he would. He had spent 2 years constructing a narrative in which the woman who had left him had lost something by leaving. In one evening at a table 4 rows from the front, that narrative had come apart in his hands. Scarlett had not lost anything. Scarlett had simply not told him what she had gained. And the man sitting beside her tonight had been, he understood now, sitting beside her all along in every room he had ever shared with her, in every photograph. In every silence he had mistaken for her coldness. He had just never bothered to look. He did not feel angry. He felt small. He put the jacket over his knees and watched the last of the cars pull away down the lantern-lined drive. In the back seat of his own car heading back into the city, Adrian watched the skyline move. He would be at her office at 9. He would bring coffee. He would not call her ma'am. The job he had walked into 6 years ago was not the job he had just walked out of, and he understood with the same quiet certainty he had felt at the top of the steps of the Vanderlyn estate that he did not want it back. Upstairs, 40 stories above a street that was finally beginning to empty. Scarlett Hayes stood at the window with her shoes in her hand and watched the tail lights of his car disappear between 2 buildings. She had not cried at the ballroom. She did not cry now. but she allowed her forehead to rest for one unguarded second against the cold glass, and she let herself feel the thing she had spent 2 years and perhaps much longer refusing to feel. Real power, she understood, was not making the man who had hurt her regret it. Real power was no longer needing him to. And the person she had been waiting for, without knowing she had been waiting, had been 3 feet behind her for 6 years, carrying her folders, saying nothing and choosing every single day to stay. On Monday, she would walk into her office at 9, and he would be there with coffee, and the arrangement they had both pretended was an arrangement would finally quietly be something else.